Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. So happy to welcome Joy Robb from Walsh University and today from Take Back the Night to our studios. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today, Susie.
Joy, we know that this is an issue. It's an issue that's been addressed for quite some time, but Take Back the Night is what, for anyone who might not be familiar with it?
Yeah, so Take Back the Night is actually kind of an international movement. It started in the 60s and 70s in Europe, but it's really based on this idea of women were coming together because they were feeling unsafe just walking the streets in their neighborhoods, et cetera. So women coming together to take back the night and take back the fear and take back the feelings of unsafety when they're walking around.
I think probably the most frightening part is when you feel unsafe in a place that ought to be safe. For example, your own home. That should be a place where you can go and everyone. That's a safe spot. But when a woman does not feel safe there, then we really need to intervene, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up to Susie about this happening in somebody's own home, right? Because what we do know about sexual and domestic violence, as well as dating violence and stalking, is that a lot of these incidents happen not from the stranger across the street when you're walking, but it also happens right there in the midst of your home, oftentimes by somebody that you know well, an acquaintance, friend, family member. So absolutely.
Are there some things that we just ought to use as far as good common sense? We were all heartbroken this summer when we read of the university student who was approached and it ended terribly. It ended the worst possible way it could end. She had been babysitting dogs. She was dog sitting and didn't take the dogs with her, which could have had a completely different outcome. Are there just some things that we should know and do, like the buddy system or so forth, to keep ourselves safer out there?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that, Susie, because it's actually a message that we're trying to combat in some ways. So there is oftentimes this idea that's set forth that it's up to the victims or the survivors in these situations to take care of themselves, to be more proactive with their safety, et cetera. And while there is a degree to which this is important, and there's nothing wrong with having lessons on self-defense, et cetera, we actually want to focus more on the primary prevention side of things. So in other words, trying to stop incidents before they happen. And the best way to do that is by addressing the potential perpetrators in these situations. So it's teaching bystanders and people who are around their loved ones who may be experiencing these issues on how to intervene appropriately and to stand up when they see a behavior that might not just be an act of violence, but might be a behavior that promotes acts of violence.
Well, and we need to shift the guilt, don't we? Because I was just guilty of that myself. I said, if only she would have done this, that could have ended differently. But she wasn't doing anything wrong out there. She was running. You just kind of think, oh, if only. But we really do want to focus on perpetrators.
Absolutely.
How do you do that? How do you get people that would be guilty of this sort of violence to change? How do we do that?
Well, that's a really complex question, Susie.
Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I would say is that what we look to do in primary prevention is we're trying to make cultural changes. So it's not just an issue of looking at somebody who might be a perpetrator or somebody who might be a victim or survivor. It's looking at the community as a whole. So how can we as a community create a culture that doesn't allow for these acts to happen or creates accountability for these acts when they do happen. So honestly, Susie, one of the things that we talk about a lot in prevention of domestic sexual violence, et cetera, is this idea of bystander intervention. So giving options to folks to intervene, which, depending on what program you're looking at, usually addresses three or four Ds is what we call them.
What are those?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. I'm so willing to share. So the first D would be to directly intervene. If you see a behavior that is really promoting these issues, going directly to either the perpetrator or the victim. Another one is distraction, D for distraction. So creating distraction, creating a disturbance that either draws attention to the situation that's occurring or actually distracts the folks that are engaged in the situation, the crime, the altercation, whatever it might be. Another one is delay. So maybe you don't feel comfortable in that particular situation intervening, so you decide to delay your response, but to definitely intervene in some way afterwards.
So call 911 later.
Exactly. Or D for delegate. So finding somebody that you believe has more authority or power in that situation to handle it than you do. So I have a history of working with middle school and high school age students. So the example that I give is if you're at a party, for example, and you see somebody being led up the steps who's intoxicated, clearly can't give consent, etc., maybe finding that big football player across the room who is taller, maybe feels stronger, might have more authority in that situation to intervene.
Very smart. And always, if you're a child, go grab an adult.
Absolutely.
And tell them something looks bad and
Absolutely.
let them intervene on your behalf, because a child shouldn't have to be the person going in and breaking something up.
They shouldn't have to be. But you know what, Susie? These are actually skills that we also teach to teenagers as well.
Wow.
When folks are going out into the schools, Domestic Violence Project Incorporated, as well as Compass Rape Crisis, are two of the organizations that are really involved in this Take Back the Night event, and they do provide education around bystander intervention in the schools. So.
You used a great example as far as being at a party in some kind of a scenario you might see at a party. What other flags should we be out on the lookout for when we're just out and about?
Yeah, when we're out and about, in terms of red flags, though, it's a term that's used in the domestic and sexual violence field. Red flags are warning signs that you should be looking for in unhealthy relationships. There are multiple. You can find some at loveisrespect.org, a great website for teenagers and young adults, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, or RAIN, all great resources. But some of them might be seeing very controlling behavior. If somebody is demanding access to passwords, whether it's for your social media accounts, if somebody is searching through your phone, using tracking devices. This has even come up as an issue with some of the new social media accounts that have GPS tracking devices. We do recommend to survivors and victims to try to disconnect their phones from those GPS devices just for safety purposes. So yeah, a lot of those are kind of safety signs.
Yes, that's a tricky one, because those also can be safety measures for someone to be able to find you. What can be used for good can be used for evil. It's really a fine line, isn't there?
It is.
What creates, other than mental illness, of course, what creates a perpetrator? What kind of an environment? How do we build these people? And then how do we know that that's how we've built these people so that we can do it the other way?
Sure. Great question. Another complex answer. But what I want to emphasize is that at the heart of perpetration is this idea of power and control. There is an organization that's created the Duluth model, is what we call it, and it looks at this wheel of power and control. Now, it was originally created, to be clear, for male batterers against female victims.
But that's not always the case,
and
is
it's
it?
not always the case. And that's actually, and thank you for mentioning that, because that's actually something that we really want to promote with our countywide Take Back the Night effort. It is absolutely recognizing that there are male survivors and male victims, as well as female perpetrators also. So, but when we look at that power and control, that is what's really at the heart, is somebody wanting to be able to influence somebody else's behaviors, attitudes, thoughts according to their will. And it also is bred a lot from entitlement.
If you've grown up in a home where abuse and violence took place, are you more likely to grow up and say, I'm going to do this differently? Or do you fall into the same patterns?
Well, you know what? We see both. And it is certainly true that there's this concept of the intergenerational transmission of violence. A lot of words there. But essentially, it's that idea that you see violence happening in your household, you learn the behavior, and you perpetrate later. But the reality is that, yes, this can be a risk factor, certainly, absolutely, for both victimization of violence later on as well as perpetration. But we know it's not the only issue, because there are many folks out there that have experienced abuse or neglect as a child that later on are choosing not to abuse. So there has to be something more. And that's why we look at it. Yeah, that's why we look at it as a very complex issue.
So Take Back the Night tries to accomplish what?
So Take Back the Night specifically, if you're looking internationally and kind of the worldwide movement for it, is trying to accomplish raising awareness as an outlet for victim survivors. It can really be adapted in many ways to meet the needs of the community where it's being implemented. For Stark County, we decided that a few years ago that we wanted to take the next step. So yes, we wanted this to be a place where victims and survivors could feel safe, where we could promote awareness around these topics. But now we want to move to the next step of, okay, let's connect somebody to some resources to assist with healing, or let's explore what we can do as bystanders for people that we love who are experiencing these topics. So with this year's Take Back the Night, I'm so excited to share we have many, many local amateur and professional artists who are coming together to explore different avenues of art that are all available to victims and survivors for healing. It's going to be a really magnificent evening.
Help me connect those dots. How does art, I love the fact that you are incorporating the arts, but how does that help?
Yes. So let me start by saying thank you, Arts in Stark, because this is partially funded with your help through the
they're
special
so
project
awesome
grant.
anyway.
I know. They've just done so many amazing things in this community.
Yes.
But I think one of the places where this idea spurred from was a few years ago. I was looking at some of the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who is considered one of the leading experts in trauma in the United States, and he talks a lot in his work about this need and this ability to use rhythmic activities to promote healing from trauma. And so he looks at it a lot with children. But again, we know children are also co-survivors and survivors a lot of times of these issues. So rhythmic activities could include a myriad of things. It could include drumming. It could include types of music, anything where you're doing those repetitive pattern behaviors. So we have folks like Alex Simon and band that are coming in,
awesome.
A fantastic drummer with a great positive message. We have folks like Half the Nation and Studio 136, who's going to be providing some dance opportunities. And Richmond Stark County dancers are, awesome. I know, right?
Awesome.
Such a great,
yes.
such a great organization. We really appreciate the work of Betty Mack, and Professional Ballroom Dance Studio will be there. Lots of different avenues that people can look to connect to. And there will be resource tables all over the evening for folks to go and see what resources are available to them here in Stark County.
So this is incorporating all of the arts, not just visual arts. And because I think I remember, we've had Amy Hope here from Kent Museum of Art,
sure.
who does the art therapy.
And Kent Museum of Art will be there as well.
Awesome.
They're part of our collaboration.
Well, that's perfect, because I know that somehow she has explained to us how there's so much healing when children express themselves artistically and so forth. But I love that this is everything, movement, dance, all kinds of artistic expression, not just visual art, but including that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And we actually even have crafters and makers that will be at the event. So Sassy Trashionista is signed up to come and assist with some crafts. Tim Carmody will be there creating, I think, possibly a mural, but he'll definitely be there helping with some interactive activities.
Well, if you haven't seen his mural downtown, you just have to go see, and you will say, how is that even humanly possible that someone could make something so lifelike on the side of a building?
It's amazing.
It is amazing. We've got some artistic people in town for sure, very talented. We do need to take a short break. We're going to be back with Joy Robb and more on Take Back the Night and the Domestic Violence Project Incorporated after these words. You're listening to Our Community.